I was standing in an underground cave, knee-deep in cold, black water, and the level was rising every second. My fears, the ones I had hidden from myself for years, came alive together with the dull roar of the wave that was sealing the way out. I wasn't making it, and in that moment, for the first time, I thought the sea might not let me go. My name is Jennifer Carter. I'm 30. I'm a historian specializing in colonial North America and maritime legends. I don't believe in curses. And water, I never liked it either. It's ridiculous. A historian who studies the coastline, yet avoids the element itself. Since childhood, water gave me not fear, but a strange, viscous tension, as if something was waiting beneath its surface. I always dismissed it as a personal oddity. That was the first thing I told myself as I sat in the notary's office, eyes swollen from crying, a black ballpoint pen in my fingers. Outside the window stretched a gray American suburban day. A parking lot, bare trees, a slice of road. On the table, paperwork about inheritance. Everything standard. My grandfather's apartment, a small amount of savings, a few belongings. And then the notary took out a separate package. "He asked me to give this to you personally," he said, "and only to you." A small wooden box, worn at the edges. I even smiled. Typical Grandpa. Anything important always hidden in some old container. I opened it at home. Grandpa always smelled of old books and sea salt, even in the years when he barely left his apartment. I remembered how he'd place his hand on my head when I did homework, and that feeling of protection was so absolute, it seemed that as long as he was near, nothing bad could happen. Now his hand was gone, and the protection too. Inside the box there wasn't much. A soft-wrapped object, heavier than it looked, and a bundle of papers tied with twine. First, the stone. I unwrapped the cloth, and the room fell silent, as if someone had turned off the hum of the fridge and the sound of the road outside. In my hand lay a large green stone, with a faint matte sheen. Not perfect, not like something from a jewelry ad, but polished so well it made you want to run your finger across its surface again. Heavy, with its own temperature, not glass, not plastic, something else. I turned it in my hand, raising it to the light, and suddenly something tightened deep inside me. Not fear, the feeling that the stone was watching. It made no sense. I slammed that thought shut like a night door that creaks too loudly. "Seriously, Grandpa?" I muttered. "Playing with your treasures again?" The papers turned out to be his journal, the same handwriting I'd seen in the margins of my school essays, and on sticky notes reminding me to eat lunch. I ran my finger along a line, and suddenly remembered how he corrected my first historical essays. He never said wrong. Always, what if you look at it from another angle? He taught me not just to study history, but to speak with it. And now his last conversation with me was in these pages. The first line made a cold stream run along my spine. 1996. Beaufort, North Carolina. Queen Anne's revenge. I found something I never told anyone about. He described the expedition to the wreck of Blackbeard's ship, how they invited him as a consulting historian, how he first saw the rusty cannons, the wooden beams covered in shells. How one day, among the debris, his fingers felt something smooth and cold, hidden in a crack. A stone. Green. Nothing like what's listed in the inventory. I put it in my pocket. Thought I'd figure out what to do with it later. Probably that was the moment I made the biggest mistake of my life. Then, the chronology of my childhood, but seen from another angle. 1996, the year my grandmother died. 1997, the year my parents died in a car accident. And after that, Grandpa's health fell apart. His work, almost everything. The tone of the journal shifted, from dry historical notes to growing fear. I'm not superstitious, but the pattern is obvious. The stone appeared. Everything broke. If it's just coincidence, why do I think about it at night? In a separate envelope were copies of letters. Recipient: Maritime Archaeological Foundation. Name: Dr. Thomas James. Grandpa asked about the Croatan tribe, about their sacred places, about a cave on Ocracoke, about the stone of the sea's pact, mentioned in an old Spanish manuscript. In James's reply, there was a translated fragment. The Indians keep a large green stone in a cave on the island, in a place reached by the tide twice a day. They say that as long as the stone is there, the sea will not take their people. Whoever takes the stone takes upon themselves the fate of the drowned. I set the letter aside. I suddenly wanted something stronger than tea. I don't believe in curses, I told myself again, but the fact remained. After 1996, the sea had taken almost everyone I loved. Not literally, not by wave or storm, but quickly, without warning. My grandmother collapsed in the kitchen. My parents never returned from an ordinary trip. Grandpa lay hooked to machines, gripping my hand as if afraid someone might take him too. At the end of the stack was another note. Different paper, different handwriting. Shaky, fractured. Jenny, if you're reading this, it means I ran out of time. I took the stone from Blackbeard's ship. I was wrong. It's not treasure. It's a guardian I tore out of someone else's history. I thought I'd sell it. Then, give it to a museum. Now I know one thing. It must be returned to where it belongs. To the cave on Ocracoke. I searched for the entrance, asked, wrote to James. I didn't make it. Don't believe in curses. Believe in responsibility. If you can do what I should have done, forgive me for leaving you this burden. I read the letter 3 times, then again, and again. The stone lay on the table. All my losses, all Grandpa's fears, all the legends I had always treated as material for lectures, not as something that could slip into my own life. I sat down across from it and placed my palm on the cold surface. And the worst part, when I imagined having to touch it again, a tightness curled in my stomach, the same as when I looked at dark water, as if the stone and the sea belonged to the same world, a world I had refused to see. The stone lay on the table. All my losses, all Grandpa's fears. Grandpa, why didn't you ask for help? I whispered. But I knew the answer. He had always solved problems alone. Even when I moved in with him after my parents' deaths, he never showed how hard it was. He simply made me breakfast every morning and asked about school as if that were the most important thing in the world. He took this curse onto himself so it wouldn't touch me, and now it was my turn to finish what he couldn't. "Okay," I said aloud. "If this is a story, and I'll see it through. If it's some ridiculous posthumous game, I'll figure that out too." The next day, I bought a ticket to North Carolina and wrote a short letter to the address Grandpa had left in his journal. "My name is Jennifer Carter. I am the granddaughter of Robert Carter. I have what he took from your expedition in '96, and it seems it's time to return it to where it was meant to stay." The road stretched on for hours, but I never took my hand off the backpack. The stone lay inside, heavy, cold, green, so large my palm couldn't wrap around it, smooth to the point of unnatural perfection, as if someone had polished it for weeks. Beautiful, but not with the depth or glow of a real gemstone. A real precious stone draws the eye inward. This one pushed it back. There was something wrong about it. When the bus crossed the first bridge over the Sound, I instinctively held my breath. The water below was dark, almost black. It blended with the sky so perfectly it felt like there was no boundary between them. I never liked looking at water from above. It always felt as if I stared too long, it would stare back. I turned away, but the sense of something watching from below stayed with me for a long time. Or maybe I had simply wound myself up after reading all my grandfather's notes. I kept replaying last night's pages in my mind. Everything was still sharp, like a fresh scratch. It all began with a name every school child on this coast knows. Edward Teach. That's how the archives spelled it. But the world knew him simply as Blackbeard. My grandfather had gathered a staggering number of fragments, testimonies, footnotes, scraps of journals. I devoured them in one evening, and the picture assembled itself almost effortlessly. In 1717, Blackbeard captured a Spanish vessel. Among the spoils was a small wooden box, and inside, a stone, green, large, polished to an uncanny sheen, almost identical to the one in my backpack. The Spanish captain, dying, whispered to Teach, "Take it. Let the misfortune pass to you. This isn't gold. It's what took my men." I imagined the scene. A man welcoming death because it freed him from the stone. That didn't sound like folklore. It sounded practical. Teach laughed, of course. He was the kind of man who believed himself stronger than anything. The sea, the storm, fate itself. But his crew didn't laugh for long. My grandfather's notes were full of terse, troubled entries. Someone disappeared during the night. Someone fell overboard during a dead calm. The ship sailed into storms, while nearby vessels floated on smooth water. The men whispered that the stone should never have been touched. The first to say it aloud was Israel Hands, his first mate. I remembered the name from school. Hands appears often in documents after Teach's death. He begged Teach to get rid of the stone. Teach answered almost coldly, "If I return this thing, I admit it is stronger than me." That sentence lodged itself in my mind. My grandfather wrote that Blackbeard could play a role better than anyone. He braided his beard with black ribbons, tucked burning fuses into his hair, so smoke curled around him like a halo of fire. Half the battles ended before they began. Fear did the killing, and yet he rarely killed anyone himself. He didn't need to. Terror worked for him. His ship, Queen Anne's Revenge, was a repurposed French slaver, fast, maneuverable, ideal for trapping other ships in the treacherous shoals along the Carolina coast. Teach knew these waters better than anyone. If he wanted a ship to run aground, it did. As if the ocean itself bent to his will. Blackbeard died in 1718, fighting near Ocracoke. They counted more than 20 wounds in his body. Even then, he never revealed where he had hidden the stone. One archival entry, the one my grandfather copied by hand, read, "He took the secret of the hiding place with him. That is why the stone lay unfound for nearly 3 centuries. In 96, archaeologists discovered a hollow space in the ship's timber, Teach's secret compartment. My grandfather was there that day, but the stone itself was never officially recorded, and only now did I begin to understand why." I had spent so long wondering why my grandfather never told anyone about the stone, and why he didn't return it to the archaeologists, though he must have understood how important every artifact from Blackbeard's ship was. But his notes gave the answer, not a dramatic one, a human one. At first, he didn't even understand what he was holding. The stone fell out by accident, from a cracked beam, wrapped in a scrap of cloth the sea had preserved for 3 centuries. The archaeologists never noticed it. To them, it was just another fragment of hull timber, shifted by water and time. Nothing like it appeared in the inventory. My grandfather took the stone as a small field find, something without museum value. Little unregistered things sometimes ended up with consultants. It happened. He thought that was all it was. A curiosity. A keepsake. Nothing more. And then he began reading. Old missionary letters, colonial reports, accounts of the Croatan tribe and their rituals. At first, he wanted to sell the stone, then donate it to a museum. But when he found the description, the great green stone kept in a cave so the sea will not take the people, everything changed. He wrote for the first time. "I think I made a mistake." That was written between the lines of condolence letters after my parents' funeral, when the pattern became impossible to ignore. The deeper he went into the history, the clearer it became. This wasn't a treasure. It was a ritual object, taken from the wrong place. He began searching for where it belonged. He wrote to archaeologists, compared 16th century maps to modern ones, dug through Ocracoke folklore, old lighthouse logs, coastal surveys, but he never found the cave. And year by year his strength faded. His handwriting trembled more and more on the page. His final entries: "I will not be able to go to sea again. I cannot wait for the low tide. I cannot climb the rocks, but Jennifer can. She is young, strong. She knows the history better than I do. She will finish what I began. And then, at the very end, I fear only one thing, that this stone may take her as well. I read those words 3 times. Each time, they felt heavier, and I understood. He had been afraid not of dying, but of leaving me alone with what he couldn't finish. I saw the camp long before I reached it. Scraps of tarps between the pines, metal containers, crates marked QAR, ropes with wetsuits drying in the wind. It looked nothing like a museum. It looked like the workplace of people who climb into the past every day, knee-deep in mud. We had agreed that I should head to the large white tent near the edge of the dunes. A handwritten sign said Field Lab. I lifted the flap and stepped inside. It was cool there. Along the walls stood tables with plastic trays filled with rusted metal fragments, shells, pieces of ceramics. In the corner, a tub of murky water bubbled, artifacts soaking inside it. In the center, a wide metal table under a bright lamp. A man in a dark jacket with rolled-up sleeves leaned over it, his hair pulled back, a few-day stubble, gloves on his hands. "Dr. James?" I said carefully. He turned, looked at me for several seconds, as if comparing my face to an imagined photograph, and then gave a faint, brief smile. "Jennifer Carter," he said. "Finally meeting in person." I nodded. "You wrote that you brought what Robert took," he said. "The stone." I put my backpack on the table and unzipped it. Those few seconds while my fingers searched for the wrapped bundle felt strange, as if I wasn't just taking out a stone, but pulling out something that tied 300 years into a single moment. I unfolded the cloth. The green surface gleamed under the lamp. James froze. Truly froze. He didn't even blink. "May I?" he asked quietly. "You may," I said. He lifted the stone in his gloved hands, carefully, as if handling something fragile, though the stone was heavy and solid. He turned it, ran a finger along the edge. "It's exactly as your grandfather described in his letters," he whispered, "and almost identical to the Croatan sources." A pause. "But I'm seeing it for the first time." "You were on the expedition, weren't you?" I asked. "The same one." "I was. But in 96, none of us saw this stone," he said. "Only the empty space in the beam. I learned what used to be there from his letters. Much later." He set the stone on the table. "All right," James said in a more professional tone. "We'll do this properly. First, analysis, then paperwork. Then we decide what to do next." The examinations began immediately. The stone was photographed, measured, weighed. James filled out a temporary card. "Green stone. Private possession. Jennifer Carter. Possible Croatan ritual object." Officially, as he explained, the stone didn't belong to the state or to the Foundation. It belonged to me. And that gave us a certain freedom. We moved to the neighboring container. a small laboratory, a spectrometer on the table, 2 microscopes, a laptop, and... "I'll send the basic data to our mineralogist," James said. "She'll come if there's anything interesting. And it looks like there is." "Do you believe it's the same stone from the Blackbeard stories?" I asked. He shrugged. "As an archaeologist, I believe in documents and coincidences, not in stones. Your grandfather gave very precise references. You brought a stone that matches the descriptions. That alone is enough to take it seriously." His eyes drifted across the green surface, and something flickered there. Not fear. Respect. Concern. I couldn't tell. In the evening, he brought me a plastic box in the small archive tent. "These are copies of your grandfather's field notes," he said. "What we still have." We sat at the table. The tent whistled softly in the wind. The first page, the handwriting I knew so well. Day 10, section of hull, possible cavity. Next entry. Day 11, something fell from the niche. A bundle. My throat tightened. Inside, a green stone. Very similar to the description of the great green stone. I looked at the stone lying in the box beside me. It seemed darker than it had a few hours earlier. The next morning, did.And Miller arrived. Short, attentive, sharp-featured. She examined the stone under the microscope, checked the spectrum. Not a gemstone, she finally said. A local stone, hand-polished a very long time ago, made to stay in place, not for wearing. She looked at me. As a geologist, I would put it back where it originally was. After she left, James and I remained in the lab alone. We stepped outside. The sun was already sinking behind the dunes. Beyond them lay water, a quiet, almost motionless stretch between the sand islands. I stopped. The waves moved too evenly, as if they weren't pushed by wind, but by something beneath them. James glanced at the water too, briefly, almost casually, but I noticed how his jaw tightened. "Is it always like this?" I asked. "Water behaves differently here," he said softly. "These places have their rhythms." He said nothing more, and he didn't need to. I turned away first. The water carried a cold that wasn't in the air. James handed me a new folder. "These are the letters your grandfather sent me after the expedition." I recognized the handwriting, slightly less confident than in his earlier years. "If I don't find the cave, someone after me must continue." James exhaled. I think we both know whom he meant. I didn't answer. A tightness coiled inside me. A premonition I refused to call fear. I flipped through the pages. His notes, fragments of legends, maps, mention of the Croatan. I couldn't shake the feeling that all of this was only the surface, that something essential he never managed to write down. "Tomorrow we head to the island," James said, gathering the papers. "To the place where, according to the legends, the breathing cave appears." "Breathing?" I repeated. "You'll see. The water there behaves differently." He said it calmly, almost casually, but a cold ripple went through me, sharp and familiar, the same tightening I'd felt in childhood, when I stared too long into dark water. And in that moment, for the first time I realized, we were close. Closer than I was ready to admit. The wind lifted sand from the dunes, as if someone invisible were running a hand across the surface of the island. The air was damp and salty, and every breath left a taste of the sea in my throat. I felt that same cold again, the one from the first day, not from the temperature, but from the sense that the water was looking back. James was waiting for me near a small container labeled Archives. Inside it was cooler. The lamps glowed with a yellow light that made the old folders look even older. "Ready?" he asked. "As ready as anyone can be," I said. We sat side by side at the metal table. James slid the first box toward me. Inside were records from the 1920s, journals of a small private expedition. 2 men, funded by an industrialist from Wilmington, explored the Ocracoke shoreline after a series of storms. The first pages were dry. Dates, coordinates, brief notes. Shore unstable. Water moved further inland. Found strange cut in stone. The second entry. Tide behavior unusual. Cave visible for approx. 14 minutes. Too dangerous to enter. The third. The one that sent a physical chill through me. Locals warned us. Spoke of Croatan stone. Said storms are payment for disturbing it. Laughable. Yet the sea rose faster today than charts predicted. We flipped a few more pages and found a small penciled map. The shore, tide lines, a mark reading possible entrance. James set the box aside and picked up another. Thin, worn by time. "Lighthouse logs," he said. 19th century. The pages were almost translucent. The handwriting changed from one keeper to another, but the same phrases repeated themselves again and again. Heard the water roar in the cove where no water should be. Strange green shimmer under the waves. Fishermen say the sea keeps what is taken from it. And then, storm tore half the beach away. For a moment, saw mouth of cave open. Something glowed inside. Then water took it back. I read it aloud, and felt the room grow smaller around us. We moved to the third folder, notes of an ethnographer about the Croatan tribe. The Croatan believed the sea was a living force, with which one could make an agreement. Once every cycle they offered gifts to the green stone, lying in the cave, reached by water twice a day. As long as the stone remained in place, the sea would not take their people. If the stone was taken, the sea would take those who touched it, and those they held dear. I read the last line, and stayed silent for a long moment. Then I said, "I didn't know about the stone then, but I remember how my grandfather sometimes took out his old box. He always closed the door, sat so that I couldn't see anything, and held it very carefully, as if something inside might shift. I was 7, and I thought it was just his eccentricity. Now I understand what he was hiding. It wasn't an accusation, just a truth that suddenly fit into place. After lunch, James called me over to a board covered with tide charts. Extreme low tides were marked in red. Ocracoke changes after every storm, he said, but one phenomenon follows a pattern. Extreme low tide. Once every few weeks, the water pulls back much farther than usual, and when it does, the drowned caves open. You can see them for maybe 15-20 minutes. "And today?" I asked. "Tonight. And at dawn. one of those cycles should happen. Just the thought of it made something tighten inside my stomach. Not fear, but the sense that this story was approaching a point of no return. We walked toward the lighthouse. The path wound through pines, the air thick with the smell of resin. An elderly man was standing at the base, looking out at the water. When James asked about the old cuts in the rock, the man didn't answer at once. "You're not the first to ask," he finally said, "but the sea shows its things only to those it chooses, and not always when it's convenient for people." He pointed us in the direction. We descended toward the shoreline. The rock was dark, slick, carved by wind and water, and where the waves struck hardest, we saw the cuts, narrow, straight, too precise. "This isn't erosion," James said. "Someone marked a path." I traced the grooves with my eyes. They led toward a break between two rocks, and just then a wave pulled back slightly farther. For 1 second, a dark opening appeared in the depth, a triangle of shadow. A blink, no longer. "Did you see?" James whispered. "Yes, that's it." He checked his watch. 20 more minutes. The tide is only beginning to fall." We waited. The waves moved slower. The sea seemed to inhale, deeply, before drawing away. In my backpack the sea shifted slightly, sharply enough that I felt it through the fabric. I stepped closer to the edge. The water retreated, more and more, and the dark opening beneath the rock revealed itself almost completely. Low, dangerous, breathing with damp cold. This was it. The Croatan cave. Behind me, James said my name softly, but I no longer listened. I tightened the straps of my backpack and stepped into the shadow. I stepped into the cave, ducking so I wouldn't scrape the rock above my head. Inside, it was tight, but not suffocating. The walls narrowed and widened in slow waves, as if the cave itself had been shaped by the breathing of the sea. I kept my fingers on the stone as I moved forward, taking careful steps. A few meters in, the space opened into a natural chamber. At its center, a hollow. Smooth, precise. The same one I had seen in the old diagrams. I took out the stone. At that moment something changed in the light, as if the sun had found a narrow crack in the rock, slipped through, and fell in a single beam straight onto its surface. The stone flared green. That must have been how it once caught the attention of those who should never have touched it. I set the stone into the hollow and hesitated for a moment. "I did it, Grandpa," I whispered into the darkness. "You can let go now." And suddenly, clear, sharp, like a memory crashing over me, I felt the smell of his old jacket, the same one from my childhood. Warm, safe. My throat tightened. Grandpa had known about the Croatan legend. He had known about the ritual, and that the stone was never meant to leave this place. He had spent years searching, not for the entrance, but for the cave itself, searching by descriptions, by maps, by scraps of other people's memories, and never found it. So the stone stayed with him as him, not as a secret, but as a burden he couldn't return. And now it wasn't in my hands anymore. It was home. The beam of light slid along the wall and vanished. I turned toward the exit, and only then felt it. The water was already touching my feet. A few seconds earlier than it should have. I quickened my pace. The cave seemed to stretch longer, or I became slower. Water reached my ankles, then my knees. I slipped. Hit something hard beneath the surface. Stone or ledge, I couldn't tell. The wind outside dimmed the light, and the entrance grew duller with every second. I stood in the underground cave, water rising to my knees, climbing higher every heartbeat. The fears I had hidden, even from myself for years, came alive with the dull roar of the wave, sealing off my escape. I wasn't going to make it. And for the first time, I thought the sea might not let me go. I lunged forward. My fingers caught the edge of a rock. I pushed through, braced my shoulder against the wall, and forced myself out of the narrowing passage. Air punched into my chest. A hand grabbed my elbow. "Jennifer!" The voice cut through the roar of the waves. "Hold on!" James pulled me upward onto drier rock. He was soaked to the waist. He must have stepped in when he realized the tide was rising too fast. His fingers trembled, but his grip was steady and deliberate. "I thought the wave wouldn't release you." He stopped, took a deeper breath, and looked at me as if only now allowing himself to worry. "You did what no one else could." Behind us, the entrance to the cave slipped under the water. It closed cleanly, completely, without a sound. The sea slowly leveled its breath. Calm, even, steady. I sat on the stone, looking at the water. It no longer looked back. It simply was. Quiet, peaceful, mine. And I was too.